Speaking of forgetting things, it's time to go back to Atari 50 and revisit one of the most violent video games ever made. And quite frankly, I'm amazed that more kids weren't running around with bicycle pumps trying to blow their friends up. Dig Dug, released in 1983 for Atari 8-bit computers and later Atari 5200 based on the 1982 Namco arcade game of the same name, is a bit of an interesting case because unlike Galaxian where they just released the same game across both platforms and Pac-Man where one version had features the other did not, Dig Dug got unique ports for both Atari 8-bit and 5200, which was kind of surprising somewhat because, well, a bit of a rarity at the time. But they did eventually port the 5200 version over to the computer line, and since both versions are featured in the Namco Legendary DLC of Atari 50 that was released earlier this year, or late last year, I don't recall, don't care to look back and check, we'll be sampling both of these under one roof. Consider this a special value, 2 video reviews for the price of none, and chances are you still overpaid. Anyway, for those unfamiliar with Dig Dug, you control a little guy who must tunnel his way through the dirt while using his pumping hose to pump air into the little critters and blow them up. Ah yes, wholesome family entertainment right there, kids. Anyway, clearing the screen of critters will clear the round and proceed you to the next round where more critters reside, wherein you get to do the whole thing all over again. Sometimes you could tunnel earth underneath some rocks which will drop downward and crush any unfortunate soul it happens to land on. If you tunnel through enough dirt, you'll eventually get a fruit bonus appearing in the middle of the screen much like a Pac-Man, and if a critter touches you, you die. If you get crushed by a rock, you also die. Lose all your lives and it's game over. Both versions of Dig Dug sport similar features, allowing you to choose between 1 or 2 player alternating play, and giving you the option to choose your starting stage, including a couple beginner stages for the slow-moving lot of you. Now, Dig Dug first graced Atari 8-bit in this format, which is generally a simpler-looking game with simple sprites and not much detail in the dirt, but on a whole, it's generally not a bad-looking game. Control is fine for the most part, but your pumping action isn't quite as effective here. In Dig Dug, you could rapidly pump your foe for a quick kill if your trigger fingers were fast enough, but in this 8-bit iteration, rapid pumping does not quite equate to a rapid kill. So you've got to take your time with these things, which is somewhat of an issue when critters are running up your rectal cavity. On proper hardware, you had the benefit of a sturdy joystick and it worked fine. Gameplay has a couple hiccups in terms of the pumping action, and the sounds are quite crude, but otherwise, this first attempt at Dig Dug on Atari 8-bit would have been perfectly sufficient if this is all you had to work with. And so when the Atari 5200 got their version of Dig Dug, it was a drastically different piece of business that almost looked like the arcade game and played a little better than the earlier release. And then Atari brought that version over to Atari 8-bit computers so that people can play the better port with a proper functioning joystick as opposed to the 5200's jank stick. And compared to the earlier port, this is naturally a much more accurate conversion. Everything looks a bit smaller and the sprites are a little less defined as a result, but there's more room to maneuver. The pumping action has been improved considerably over the earlier conversion, and gameplay generally feels much quicker, which should please some folks who prefer their arcade fare to be quick and painful. Sound seems a bit more muted here, but nothing too serious. And yeah, 2 different flavors of Dig Dug on Atari 8-bit, both of them fairly different from each other, but also fairly similar. The later version might have done a better job at coming closer to arcade accuracy, but there's a charm to the earlier release that I can't help but admire, even if the pumping isn't quite up to snuff. Either way, Dig Dug got a couple good efforts on the old computer line, and both are worth playing for curiosity's sake and such.